You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle and me at leadersandlegends.net. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. He's pretty cute, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was great.
Our guest today is Mel Raines, and the Mel is short for?
Michelle with one L.
And that is your designated trouble name?
When I'm in trouble, Rick Fuson calls me Michelle, so I know something bad has happened.
Mel has been with Pacer Sports and Entertainment since 2015. She now serves as president and chief operating officer.
Correct.
As well as president of the 2024 NBA All-Star Local Organizing Committee. To be candid, if we sat here and read everything that she is doing, would do, or has done, we could just get right to the 5 questions because our time would be up. It's no surprise that Mel gets selected and gets asked to do these things. She's a singularly impressive, respected, and beloved person in this city. Thank you, Mel.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you have been nothing but kind to me, and I think everybody else on the planet who you've encountered. And so, unlike some of the folks we've had on here who've had a little bit of a rougher edge to them, it doesn't mean that you can't be tough, but your career is terrific. Like a lot of us, kind of started out in politics a little bit.
I did.
And used that as kind of the springboard, the foundation. Reading through your bio, you're from South Bend, but you went to Indiana University in Bloomington.
I did. I decided at 17, because these are the smart things you decide at 17, that I didn't want my mom or my dad to show up at my dorm room, when I was 18, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes from home. So
we're in the elevator.
Yeah. Now that's assuming I could have gotten into Notre Dame, which is debatable. But my older sister was at IU and I had gone down to see her a couple times. And, when you're making these big decisions, I thought I could fill out a postcard at the time. It was a postcard to go to IU. Or I could do this really long application and write these essays, and my mom's going to show up at my dorm room. So I filled out the postcard and I went to IU. Were
you guys there at the same time eventually? You spent time there together?
We were. My sister is 4 years older than I am, but she liked IU so much she was there for 6.5 years to get her undergrad degree. So we didn't overlap in high school, but we did overlap in college, which was great because when I first got there, I was a little homesick, and it was nice to have her there, and her friends became, like big sisters to me too.
Did you do the sorority thing?
I did not. I was at McNutt. So I was there for 2 years, and then my 3 girlfriends that we lived on the same hall wound up getting an apartment junior year and a house senior year. So that was my sorority.
We've had several IU grads on the podcast. We've had actually the current President Whitten, on the podcast, who graduated from Kansas, I believe. Nobody I've interviewed or have met ever wanted to leave IU. And they would all go back there today, especially with the money they have now, if they could. What makes Bloomington, Indiana University, so special? Because it clearly is.
It is. And my story is a little different, I'll tell you, than that. And I grew up in a college town. So I think it was really familiar to me to be in another college town. But it's a beautiful campus and environment and all of those things. But between junior and senior year, I went to London. I was an advertising major, and I went and worked in an advertising agency and did an internship and studied there. And I came back my senior year, and I decided Bloomington was just too small for me. I was now going to be a big city person, and I needed to spread my wings. So I was cutting through the SPIA building. I was a telecom major, and they had one of those things on the wall where you pull off the slips on the bottom to apply to things. And I applied to the DC. I didn't know where Washington, DC was, but I thought that's a city. And I applied to go to the SPIA Washington semester, my last semester senior year, because I just felt like I wanted to be in a big city. And I got in. I was the only non-SPIA student. And that's kind of just how I wound up on this strange 20-year political path, never really having taken a poli-sci class. I do love Bloomington. I go back. I have a friend who lives down there. I was lucky enough to be at the IU Purdue game last year where we beat Purdue at Assembly Hall, and it was amazing with my college roommate Karen, who's still one of my closest friends, and I see her every week in our Pilates class, and she and so it's just a special place. But I was ready to leave earlier than most people probably.
So when did you graduate from IU?
I graduated in 91.
So you missed. Am I trying to do my math here? You missed the 87.
In between. Yeah, my sister was there for that, and as I recall, she woke up in her closet with a sprained ankle the next day and doesn't know what happened. But I was not there. I was in high school,
and I was in the Army, and the first TV I watched after basic training was when they beat UNLV in the Final Four.
Oh,
that was the very first thing that I saw coming out of Fort Knox.
Yeah,
and so you left before they got super good again.
I did. But my freshman year, we were really good in football, like we were recently. And
Anthony Thompson?
Yes. And I thought, because I grew up in South Bend, like everybody's good in football, right? And so we beat Michigan and Ohio State my freshman year. And I thought, well, that's just what happens. And then I was 50 before it happened again. So I didn't realize how lucky I was.
You work with Mr. IU. You worked with two Mr. IUs.
I work with a lot of Mr. IUs, yeah.
Bill Benner being one of them when he was at Pacer Sports and Entertainment.
Yep.
And we should say best wishes to Sherry Benner. Hope you're feeling better.
Yeah.
I know you're kicking cancer's ass, but we love you and think the world of you and hope for the best.
The Benners are the best.
They
Absolutely.
are. Including the recently departed David Benner.
Mr. David Benner, yep. We miss him.
Such a funny guy.
Yeah.
He came on the podcast. We spent an hour and a half making fun of Bill Benner.
I listened to it. It was great. It was great.
He's a wonderful, wonderful man. And you're right. We do miss him.
Yeah.
And to Jane Jankowski, our deepest sympathies.
Yeah. Jane's the best, too.
Jim Morris, Mr. Indiana University.
Correct.
Is it fun being surrounded by a group of folks who just kind of know in a small degree what your life was like in college and kind of coming out of it? Because Jim Morris was a political person coming out of college when he started working for Mayor Lugar.
Yeah, it's, the Pacers are just feels like it's a small family business in a lot of ways. And we're an NBA team, but, owned by the Simon family, and Jim's been there for, I think he just had his 15-year anniversary with the Pacers. Rick is in his 40th season, and he is an IU guy as well. He played football at IU. Not a lot of people know that. He and Quinn were on the football team together.
I did not know that. Well, I've tried to get Mr. Fuson on the podcast. If you could prod him, I would love that.
I will do my best, but
it's either him or Denny Sutherland.
Rick does what Rick wants to do, as you know. And then Quinn, who's now the head of the board of trustees. And so it's there's a lot of IU people there. There's also a lot of Purdue graduates. So we have a pretty good rivalry back and forth. We have some Ohio State people that they're especially hard to stomach. But
point taken.
But yeah, it's very very homey, and I think we're all proud whenever an Indiana university does well at anything, certainly. But we don't wear a lot of red around the office because of the Bulls, but occasionally you see some good IU wear. Yeah.
And you have one of my favorite Miami Dolphins fans, and that's Mr. Danny Lopez.
Danny Lopez, and he wears teal and orange like nobody's business. Yeah.
I've been a Dolphins fan since Super Bowl VI, and he and I and your friend Roger Harvey bond over the Miami Dolphins. Great people. People.
Yeah.
You mentioned your start in politics. A lot of us kind of, I went in the Army, went to college, got involved in politics. That was kind of the path that I wanted to choose. You mentioned about going to Washington, D.C. How did it change your life? Who did you meet? How did it expand your horizons? You were talking about wanting to be in a big city. Washington, D.C. is a significant place.
It's a big city, yeah. I can still remember I landed in January 91, right before the Persian Gulf War started, and taking a cab, never having been there, to our apartment building where they housed us for IU. And it was, the middle of the day on a weekday, and people are running, and you're going by the Pentagon and the Lincoln Memorial and the mall, and it's just this overwhelming feeling. And it's, when you're young, it's such a great city. There's so much to do, and there's so many young people, and there's so many free happy hours in there, so I had a great roommate, and it was a really good program. And she's still here, and friends as well. And we had a great semester, and I fell in love with DC. Not really politics. My roommate, Kim, worked for Senator Lugar and was an intern in his office. And so I learned a lot about Kim Skillman. Kim Eckerly. Sorry.
Okay.
She's been married for 25 years. I should know that. But to Jason Eckerly, who's also a dear friend and was on our program. And so I learned a lot about the Hill from her, and a lot of the other folks interned that I was there with were interning on the Hill for House members or Senator Lugar. And so when we were getting ready to graduate, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I decided to go back, and I applied for an internship with Dan Coates and office. And I think I was the only female applicant, which I'm sure helped, because I'm sure it was a terrible application. If I read it, I would be mortified to see whatever I wrote down, because I wasn't really political. But I wanted to stay, and I thought that would be a good place to start my career. And so I started there in June of 91. And in August, he was running for his reelection. He had been appointed to the seat when Dan Quayle became vice president. So he had to run statewide in a special election to keep it in 90, and then statewide again in 92 for a full 6-year term. Which is tough, to do 2 statewides in 2 years. And so I got the internship. Somebody moved back to be his driver for the campaign. And so I got the front office job, which was maybe my favorite job I've ever had, because I'm good at talking on the phone. And we got to read all the magazines that came in, People Magazine and Time Magazine and Newsweek, and you got all the free magazines. And it was just a great office. I mean, we had some superstars in that office that have gone on to do some really astonishing things. And I learned so much in that time. But it's a miracle I got that job, because I was not a great intern.
Well, let's spend a second. Like you, I've met hundreds of people, important people in politics. I mean, someone like a Jim Morris is an important person in politics,
Absolutely.
Even though he's not political. There's nobody nicer. That's not true. I put Greg Ballard 1 because he's the nicest man. But Dan Coates is 1A. He is so incredibly personable and genuine and kind and funny.
Yeah.
And
well,
humble.
Maybe he's gonna jump to 1AA for you when I tell you the story. So as an intern, he had an assistant, a secretary who had been with him for years, and she was fantastic, and she never left her desk. And this is before cell phones, and your landline is important in the Senate at the time. She goes to her annual once a year. She goes to lunch, I think, with the other secretaries. So she asks me, can you sit at the desk for an hour? It's Senate Policy Committee. He won't be here. Just take messages and I'll be back in exactly 60 minutes. I say, no problem. I got this. Well, Policy Committee gets canceled and Senator Coates shows up. And so he goes in, I'm nervous. He goes in his office. He said, if anybody calls, I'm in here working. And I said, okay. So the phone rings, and he was on the Armed Services Committee, and Secretary of Defense Cheney's secretary is calling and says the Secretary of Defense would like to speak with Senator Coates. And I say, okay, just a minute. And I put it on hold and I run around the desk. I go in his office and I say, Secretary of Defense Cheney's on the phone for you. And he says, great, send it right in. And I go out and I proceed to disconnect the call accidentally. So I'm freaking out, of course, because the diamond that blinks is now gone. So phone rings again, and it's now Secretary of Defense Cheney, no more assistant, saying, I need to talk to Dan Coates. And I say, just a minute. And now Dan's standing in front of my desk, and I panic, and I take the handset, and I just hang it up. I literally completely panicked. And he just looked at me, and I don't know how he didn't kill me. And it immediately rang again. And he goes, just get up from your desk. And he took the call at Karen's desk and then went back in his office. And Karen came back 20 minutes later and said, how did everything go? And I said, it did not go well. Things did not go well. You should never leave again. Don't ever leave again.
And did she look at you like, what could possibly
What did you do? Yeah. So anyway, I still got the job. I don't know how, but I think I amused him enough in general that he liked me. But I literally would have strangled me if I were him.
So does that give you've had assistants in your career, which we're going to talk about next. Does that give you a little bit of extra patience?
Absolutely. I mean, I learned so much grace from him and everyone. I've been lucky. I've generally had really great mentors and bosses and leaders I worked for. And yeah, absolutely. And I used to think at the time he was old. He was younger than I am right now. And I'm definitely not old. So, I mean, I
hope not, because I'm older than you.
Yeah. He was like 50 at the time, and he was a U.S. Senator and just so great. And I worked there for almost 5 years. I loved working there and had several jobs along the way. And like I said, we had a bunch of superstars in that office that have gone on to do super interesting things, including the senator himself. And so it was a great first place to land.
I met him and Devin Anderson, speaking of rock stars.
Yeah, Devin was there when I was there.
I was working at the Holiday Inn Airport. Was out of the Army, going to college, but was working at the Holiday Inn Airport for Jim Dora's company.
Yeah.
And both Mr. Dora and his
Jim
son.
last night, yeah.
And he was just wandering. Dan Coates, Senator Coates at the time, this would have been probably spring of 92. So he was running again, this time against Joe Hogshead. He had beaten Barron Hill in 90.
Yep.
And he's just wandering the hall, this big atrium at the Holiday Inn Airport. And he had someone with him who looked exactly like Superman, which turned out to be Devin Anderson, Clark Kent.
Yep.
And I said, sir, forgive me, but would the senator like a room to kind of just hang out in if he's waiting for a call or a flight? And, Senator Lugar was at the Holiday Inn Airport all the time.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, sure. That's, how nice of you kind of thing. I'm like, it's Senator, you're Senator. No one else recognized him.
Yeah.
He was fairly new. And he came up to me afterward, and Dan Coates came to me afterward and he personally gave the key back, of course. Said, thank you so much. Would love to have you work on the campaign. Let me know. And he was an Army veteran, is an Army veteran. I was just out of the Army, so we talked about that. And it was the first campaign I ever worked on was 92. Everybody was wonderful. Brose McVeigh was the campaign manager. Everybody was so wonderful. And you fast forward 20-some years later, Senator Coates agrees to come on the podcast. He does. And I said, sir, we'd like to have you on twice, and he's coming on again. What would you like me to call you? Senator, Mr., Ambassador, Director, because he was Director of National Intelligence. He goes, I'll spell it out for you. And I said, sure, go ahead. And he goes, D-A-N. And I said, you're kidding me. And he goes, no, call me Dan. I said, I only do that on one condition. And he chuckled. He goes, what? I go, you have to give me permission during the podcast to call you Dan, because I don't want the listeners to think that I'm some sort of, parvenu. And he laughed. He goes, I'll take care of that for you. Don't worry about it. So Dan Coates could not be so smart, so respected. I just wish we had more Dan Coates in the world. Yeah,
statesman. I agree. The Senate in 91 was a different place. I mean, it wasn't.
That was my next question, actually, was how much different?
So much different. It was antiquated, right? We didn't have email, so we opened letters and, those kinds of things. But we were around the corner from Chuck Robb from Virginia, who was a Democrat.
Vietnam vet.
Yeah.
Married to Lyndon Johnson's daughter.
Yep. Lady Bird used to bring them popsicles in the summer. Once a summer, she would come by, and we would play softball with them and go to happy hour with them. And they were, it was what I've often thought back about is when it's hard for me to call him Dan. I saw him last summer. I call him Senator. When he was exactly the same person in the early 90s. As when he went back to the Senate in 2011. And he was one of the maybe the second or third most conservative senator when I worked for him. Jesse Helms might have been a little farther right. But he's a true north. He has not changed. And he was a moderate when he went back. And that's not a long span of time,
no.
12 years to have that kind of swing. And, it was just a little bit more collegial in terms of all the offices and, talking to each other. And it just, I don't know. When I went back and worked for Susan Brooks, who's also phenomenal.
A+.
Yeah, just the, I don't know, the tenor, the mood, it's just really different. And of course I'd been in DC in between there, but the Hill's different. When you're on the Hill, it's different. When you're working on the Hill, it's just a different feeling, and not really a good feeling.
Would you advise young people? If you talk to groups all the time, I'm guessing, or have certainly throughout your career. Would you advise someone a 20-year-old college young man or young woman to go into politics?
That's hard. I mean, I think if you feel passionately about something, yes, then of course. And I think that public service is important. I feel that maybe you're working for the city like you did, or the state government, or maybe you're working for the federal government in the Hill. It's a honorable profession. It certainly is. And it's hard. And you don't get paid a lot of money, and you work a lot, and it can be difficult. So I wouldn't steer people away. I wish we could get a little bit more, every single day doesn't have to start with a tweet that, gets your day off on a roller coaster ride. And what I was always proud of when I worked for Senator Coates is, I think he co-authored Head Start with Ted Kennedy when I was there. Like, that's okay. You can work together doesn't mean you're a weak, terrible person and you shouldn't be in office. It means you can find common ground to do good things sometimes.
Think about Richard Lugar losing the primary because of a lot of reasons, but one of them being his willingness to work with Barack Obama. Whatever you think of President of the United States, we all got to work together.
Yeah. But I hope lots of good, smart young people do decide to go there and change things. And I hope that smart, good people like Dan and Susan Brooks keep running for office.
You meet really, really good. If you don't care about the other person's point of view on issue X, Y, or Z, in other words, if that's not how you base everything, a lot of people in politics wake up on vibrate and they just can't wait to be arguing with somebody. Yeah. If you get past that, then you really will meet some of the most brilliant, honest, caring, genuine, loyal people on the other side, and have these amazing friendships.
Yeah.
And then just realize that when the curtain closes, they're going to vote for Democrat and you're going to vote for Republican. You know what? That's not the end of the world. It's kind of what we fought for multiple times.
Absolutely. I have some really close friends who are Democrats, and, there should be two parties or more even. I mean, it's okay to not think the same thing and to go have a milkshake or a martini after work with them. Again, you've got to collaborate to get things done. And so I have some really good friends who are Democrats, and I tease them. Taylor Schaefer's a good friend, and, I tease her that she drives her Bernie Sanders mobile Volvo around. But, she, I think, is shocked that also to be my friend. But we have a lot in common, and we have a goal to make downtown better, and, brings you together. It doesn't matter, who you work for.
And Taylor Schaefer, who used to be chief of staff for Mayor Joel Hogshead, is now president of Indianapolis Downtown Inc. or Downtown Indy.
Yep.
Terrific young leader, very personable. I've had lunch with her several times, always at English Ivy's because that's our place.
Yeah.
And much like the foundation of modern Indianapolis, which is a hell of a lot different than the Indianapolis I grew up in when I was a kid, you realize it's like we need the Michael Brownings and the Mark Miles, or else we can't succeed.
Absolutely.
You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is Mel Raines. She is President and Chief Operating Officer of Pacers Sports and Entertainment. I've asked several guests, like a Bill Benner, a Mark Miles, folks who've been around a while, Jeff Smulyan, folks like that. If I had told you in 1982 that not only would Indianapolis have a professional football team, we would host a Super Bowl while completely redefining what it meant to host a Super Bowl, what would your answer have been? What would your reaction have been? And they all look at me like I'm from Neptune, like they're just like, no way, or, oh, we could see it kind of, but the vast majority is, I couldn't have believed it. You were in the trenches from day one, basically, for the Super Bowl committee that pulled off what I would say is the apex of Indianapolis's performance on the world stage, if you take out the 500 every year. No offense to those folks. But, I mean, really the Super Bowl is sui generis. It's just this gigantic event. How did you come to be associated with the Super Bowl committee? What was your role? And just take some time and tell us what it was like to work on something where everyone is watching.
Yeah, sure. I owe my time there very much to a couple people. So Mike McDaniel, who I've known for years when he
Wonderful.
was state party chair. Yep, great guy. He was state party chair when I worked at the Republican National Committee, got to know him well over the course of many years. He was up in Minnesota on a visit scouting out the delegation stuff for the 2008 Republican Convention. I was the COO of that convention, and we were having dinner the day after Indy won the Super Bowl bid for 2012. So this is 4 years ahead of time. And he was telling me about it. And I just sort of parked that in the back of my mind. Anyway, so then fast forward, and the other person is Jack Swarbrick, so the Notre Dame athletic director, who's a Democrat.
Who is a Democrat. I can say that both Mike McDaniel and Jack Swarbrick have come on the Leaders and Legends podcast.
Yeah.
They're terrific.
They're great. So Jack, I had met when Indy bid to host the Republican Convention in 2000. I was a staff person traveling with the committee, and Jack, I think, sort of took an interest in me being a Hoosier, and we kept up over the years. And so I knew Jack was affiliated with it through Mike. So in early 2009, I reached out to Jack and said, could you introduce me to Allison Millington? We had coffee. I think it might have been over Christmas of 2008. We had coffee, and she told me the process. She's going to post the jobs, and here's what they'll be. And so anyway, I kept an eye out. I applied online with everybody else. I think 140 or 50 people applied for the job I wound up getting. I feel confident I got the interview because of the connection to Jack and Mike and others, but I didn't really call in. I didn't lobby. I didn't call Governor Daniels, or I didn't call anybody and say, I wanted them to hire me because they thought I was the right person for the job and I would do well, not because they felt pressure to hire me. So I did a phone interview, and there was a committee. Another great one. Caroline Mays was the head of HR. She grilled me on this call. And
she
then,
doesn't play around, does she?
She does not. I love her. And so then they flew me out, and I did an in-person interview and wound up getting the job. And so I was the fourth person on the 30-person staff or whatever.
Were you at the Republican National Party?
Not at the time.
You said they flew you out. So what were you doing?
I was in D.C. I had finished in the White House, and I was doing political consulting with Mary Cheney. So she had a group and a firm. Loved working with Mary. I was just 20 years. I was ready to move back to my home state and do something different. And this was about as different as I could have imagined going to work on a Super Bowl. But I had a significant event experience, having worked, I think, on 4 Republican conventions at that point. That's what attracted my resume stood out to Allison because of the security piece. I had
Right.
overseen, it's a little more complicated when you get to a Super Bowl. So anyway, I moved back in September of 2009, and it was awesome. And it was also humbling because I'd been the COO in Minnesota on that convention, and I had a driver and an assistant, and I was 125 people. And I got there and I was like booking Mayor Ballard's flight myself to go to the Miami Super Bowl site trip. Like it was bare bones.
You booked my flight?
Yeah, we did.
Our flight?
Yeah.
There's no way.
Yeah, Allison.
Well, that's the world turned upside down, isn't it? Mel Raines, one of the most respected leaders in the history of this city. And
it was roll up your sleeves, and there's no one else that's going to do the work, and we have to, take 30 people down there. So it was great though. And it was to come back home after 20 years gone and immediately in 90 days reconnect with everybody. Was, because everyone wanted it to be successful and everyone was all in, whether that was the corporate community, the governor's office, the mayor's office. And so it accelerated me coming back 10 years if I had taken a regular job, a quote regular point. Job. So, and it was great. I'd met Eric Holcomb before. He had come to DC with Governor Daniels, who won an award for his second reelection. And I was working for Vice President Cheney, and we stopped by the event, and I met him there, and he wanted to...
Speaking of nice guys in politics.
Yeah, great guy. Wanted to meet... he said, could I get my picture with Vice President Cheney? I mean, he's a staffer. And I said, of course. So I introduced them. He gets a picture. I sent it to him. And so when I got back, we had lunch, and it just sort of restarted a great friendship that... now it's so great that he's governor, but it's just so funny how you look back to 2009 where everybody was, and it's not that long ago, but it is that long ago.
Being a staffer, like you've been, Eric's been, Governor Holcomb, myself, others, as you were saying, it is humbling because, you do this. It's not scut work, but it's not glamorous. I got iced tea for the state auditor when I was her executive assistant. I mean, those things are just what you do.
Yeah.
And when you listen to you say some of the things you've done, I'm laughing thinking, A, that's kind of how you pay your dues. And B, you reflect upon that when you're in higher positions of authority and responsibility. When an executive assistant says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to," I'm always like, don't even give it a second thought. It's not that big a deal. Do you know how many times I screwed up a lunch reservation when I was Connie Nass's executive assistant? But when you get into the higher places of responsibility, how do you stay Mel Raines?
I guess I don't know any other way to be, I mean, it's... I don't think I read much press about myself, I guess. I don't know that there's that much press about myself anyway. But, I am who I am. And I think I'm a sort of have worked for servant leaders. And I just think my style is the same. I appreciate the work that other people are doing because I've done that same work.
Exactly.
When I walk around the building, we had a Fever game Sunday, and I was walking, Danny and I were working the game, and there was this drives me insane. The stickers they put on the bottom of the hats that we sell that are like NBA official stickers, people peel them off and they stick on our terrazzo, and it drives me insane. And so I was walking by and I saw one, and I got down on my hands and knees and peeled it up. I'm like, I cannot walk by this. And should I be doing that? Probably not, but I can't not do that. I can't walk by trash on the concourse and not pick it up. I want the other 300 employees we have to do the same thing. So that's how you should be. And so I guess that's a small example to say, I am who I am. And so
what could someone do to make you angry? I've never heard you raise your voice ever.
Oh, well,
Other than driving, which we know you have a particular affinity for.
Yeah. There are two things that probably make me irrationally angry. One is technology problems. I just can't stand it when something doesn't work or the email doesn't go through. When the thing comes on that just says it's waiting, that just makes me insane.
Alan, this is all working, right? All this technology for the pack. Okay.
It better be, Alan. Don't make me mad. I know. And then the other one is it's going to be funny. I said, honestly, is people who lie. right? Just don't tell me versions of the truth that aren't the truth. Just don't lie to me, and we're going to be fine. Even if you make a mistake, just tell me what happened. And then let's learn from it and don't do it again. I've made 1 million of them myself. I just try not to make the same one twice. So I can't stand it when people lie.
You are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. It's presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our guest today is Mel Raines. She's the Chief Operating Officer and President, Pacer Sports and Entertainment. Is there a particular Hoosier leader and or legend you admire most? We've talked about Dan Coates, Jim Morris, mentioned some of the others. Maybe choose someone a little different. Oh, you did mention Allison Millangton, who's off the charts.
Yeah, Allison's great. I mean, I might pick Susan Brooks. I mean, she has become a dear friend of mine, but is a great cheerleader for the state of Indiana that people don't understand. One of the best connectors I've ever seen. She will meet a stranger at an airport in Lord knows where. She could be in Sweden, and she would find someone they knew in common and then tell them something about our state that's great, and encourage them to come here for some reason.
She's one of the world's great listeners.
She's a great listener. She's a great advocate for women, but anyone who she thinks, needs a hand, quite honestly. And she does it all sort of mostly under the radar. She happily stepped away from her seat, and she's not out on the news every day or throwing a lot of stuff out on Twitter. But she's quietly working to advocate for the things she really cares about. And I really respect that. She's great. How did you end up? I want to do this in somewhat chronological order. Good luck.
So let's go back just for 1 second. Okay. Where were you on 9/11?
Well, I lived in New York City, and I worked for Philip Morris Companies, and I was in our office across from Grand Central Station.
And how did the day unfold for you?
Well, I was already in the office, and I was on my way to a meeting when my boss and I were walking by a conference room, and a colleague had we didn't have TVs everywhere in the office. It was on, and she was watching the local news, like the local Fox News, I think. And she said, something hit the World Trade Center, and we went in there. We were looking at it, and
you couldn't see it from the Philip Morris building.
No, we were probably. It's probably.
Could you see the smoke?
No, we were in Midtown, so it's 3 miles away or something as the crow flies, and maybe 2. And so anyway, long story short, we're standing there, and the local newscasters are saying, "Oh, a commuter plane flew into it," and they had a guy from Hoboken right across the river on, by phone, and Robert from Hoboken's on the phone. What did you see? And he said it was an American Airlines plane that I saw it fly into the World Trade Center, and it was just totally silent. And the picture was just the one on fire, and then all of a sudden there was a fireball on the screen, and the person, I looked at my boss and said, "Was that a replay of the plane hitting?" And we looked at each other, and the other one was on fire, and now this one was on fire, and it was sort of your holy shit moment.
Exactly.
I'm on an island that planes are flying into tall buildings, and I'm in a tall building. And so obviously everything was canceled. The protocol in New York at the time from the last World Trade Center bombing was shelter in place. So they had they locked us in the building until about 1:00. And then I walked home. A couple of my colleagues who couldn't get home came with me into my studio apartment and stayed. But yeah, it was a horrible, horrible day, week, month.
When did you go back to the office?
We went back so we were told we could go in Thursday. And then, so I did, because I'm sitting in a studio apartment, there's nothing you can do. And I walked in. I didn't want to ride the subway, so I walked to work maybe 1.5 miles. And an hour in, there was another issue at the Grand Central, and they sent us all home, and we went back on Monday. So
when you saw the plane or read about the plane hitting the Pentagon, you obviously had folks there, including someone you work with now.
Yeah.
Allison Barber.
Yeah.
Speaking of wonderful podcast guests, she was terrific. Yeah. Were you worried that someone, maybe you knew someone in the towers, but we're talking D.C. for a second, that you knew someone in the Pentagon who had been killed?
Sure. I mean, I had worked on the campaign, on the Bush-Cheney campaign, and so I knew a lot of people in the administration in general and had been to the Pentagon many times, and myself, and I knew that building, you know, how it's built makes it, you've been there, like, especially kind of vulnerable for something like this. And I had a lot of friends in the White House, and, you know, you didn't know what else was coming, and their stories from that day are just unbelievable.
Mitch Daniels told us about his day. It was very interesting. Yeah, you're exactly right. The Super Bowl, let's get back to that for a second. Could it have gone? There's all sorts of behind-the-scenes hiccups. And I was working for Mayor Ballard at the time. But the Super Bowl committee basically had a blank check, like, what do you need? And we'll do it, as you were saying a few minutes ago. And the leadership was ridiculous. Mark Miles, Allison Millangton, the list goes on.
Yeah.
Tony Mason, you. If you were to write a book about it, the experience, what would we learn that we don't know?
Yeah, it was really kind of the perfect storm, I think, of people coming together and entities coming together. And, but there were, you know, there were a lot of almost disasters along the way. There were certainly frustrations and mission creep. You know, I'm a pretty straightforward, you know, operational person, and we kept adding and adding and adding, and I'm like, we've got to deliver. You know, I would be worried, like, we have to deliver on the basics before you have to bake the cake before you decorate it to some degree. And I would get worried. You know, I would tell Allison, I'm worried. Like, we're, you know, the Super Cures event, which was great. The breast cancer piece we did, like, we're not going to cure breast cancer, was something I would say to her. I've got to have a transportation plan, you know, kind of stuff. And in Allison's view, rightly, she taught me a lot. We can do all of those things. All of those things can happen together. And she kept, you know, kind of moving us in the right direction. It's easy when you know your last day on your first day to just be all in and do the 20-hour days. You've done it on campaigns and other things. It's harder to do it when there's no end date. But, you know, the Pan Am garage, the day that they were worried about it, you know, that it wasn't going to be structurally sound, and we were going to have the ESPN set on it. And David Sherman called me and said, we're shutting it down, and we've got to do a quick structural study to see if we can have this. And Allison said, run over and see if anybody notices. And every news truck was there, and there was, like, caution, you know, dead person caution tape. And I thought, this is not good. You know, those kinds of things were happening. But I think, you know, you make your own luck. And so we did a lot of hard work to set a great groundwork. And the story I use that you couldn't plan, script, anything else was on Super Bowl Sunday. There were some people tailgating, Giants fans, I believe, and because it was so beautiful out. Can't do anything about that.
Wasn't the days before, but yes, Allison tells that story. It's like, well, it wasn't exactly 75 and sunny all week.
Yeah, thank you, Mother Nature, for that. And so the 5 a.m. news people are out, you know, nothing to cover yet. And they said, oh, we forgot our Frank's Red Hot sauce, but everything else is perfect here. And 4 people brought them, knew where they were based on what they could see on the news. Somebody biked them hot sauce. Somebody drove them hot sauce. Somebody walked them hot sauce. And then that was on the news later. Like, you can't plan that, right? That's just people being proud of where they live and wanting this to be good. There's no staff work that can do that. There's no money that can buy that. That's just us. And so when you take the hard work and the resources and the talent we had, and then you combine it with that special secret sauce, we always call it, like, how do you lose, you know? And that's what we have to, that lightning in a bottle is what we're trying to recreate for the All-Star game next year.
For the
NBA All-Star game.
So was there a day or a time where you're like, we're behind the curve really bad here for the Super Bowl, and I just don't know if we can catch up, because you can't possibly know everything that's going on. Even I, in the mayor's office, I was basically there just to be helpful for the media. And you want to give shout out to your kick-ass media person for the Super Bowl?
I sure do. You did a fantastic job.
No, not me.
Who
worked for the Super Bowl?
Oh, Diana Boyce.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. She's on our team again. We have her on the NBA All-Star Game, leading our efforts there, and she's doing a fantastic job.
She's
and
so
another
good.
Cheerleader for this city like no other. I mean, she's fantastic, and you sort of forget that she's 4 foot, 11, nothing, 100 pounds, soaking wet, because she's a force of nature. But no, I would say I never thought it wasn't going to happen and be good. But what it means is you roll up your sleeves and you work, 7 a.m. to midnight all the time. About 2 weeks before the game, I came down with a horrible cold, and I did not have time for a cold. And I've maybe had 5 sick days in my entire career, and this was going to be one of them if I was in a regular job. And so I have a friend in town who's a doctor. I called him at 6 a.m, and he's like, I'll call you a Z-Pack. Go pick up the Z-Pack and get Advil cold and sinus, Afrin, Mucinex, take that, and like something else. And I had it lined up on my desk, by 7:30. And I said, if I start to seize and the ambulance comes, I took all of these things I have taken, just tell them what it is. And we like mushroom clouded this cold, and I was fine in about a day. But I was like, I've got, 20-hour days in front of me. But I knew we would get it done, but it was a lot.
In some ways, when you work in politics, I'm going to overstate this, so you correct me, but it's going to transition to something else. Election day, it's not anticlimactic, but it's kind of like the exhale day. We've done all we can. It's up to the voters. There's nothing we can do now. Was Super Bowl Sunday like that for you? Like, because I know, I'm guessing that you and Tony and Allison and Diana and everyone else saw about a minute of the game, maybe. What was Super Bowl Sunday like for you? And then talk to us a little bit about the next day when it clearly went so well. The Patriots, thank God, were defeated by the Giants. Everything about it was just magnificent. And then you come into work the next day, whether real or metaphoric, tears of joy.
Yeah. I've never thought about that analogy, but you're absolutely right. It was Super Bowl Sunday was like election day. Your work is largely done. The cake is baked, and now you just have to see what happens. And I was ready for something to happen, and I was going to need to swing in and do something, and it didn't. So I there's a control center for the Super Bowl up in the press box that the league builds out. Mm-hmm. And Andy Arnold, who was my kind of right-hand person and worked at the stadium before he came to work with us, and now he runs the building, Cambridge Fieldhouse, and leads that team. He's fantastic. So he was in the control center as our all-day person. I was out around downtown. And then at game time, they called me and said, come up and sit up here for the game. So I didn't have a view of the field, but there's screens, and I got to see kind of how that worked from their perspective. Side note, subsequently, I've worked 8 or 9 Super Bowls for the stadium team and gone for 4 or 5 days and helped, which is really fun to do. But I got to sit and see that, and it was really smooth. And then after the game, they invited us to go down on the field, and they have a little party for all the people who worked.
Oh, that's terrific.
After the teams are gone and all that, they get some beer and you take pictures. And so that was really great. They let Mike Fox, who ran the stadium then, down, and a few of us went down. And then
Mike is terrific.
Mike's great. Yeah. He's helping us also with the All-Star game. So the next day, this is the best thing. So my father, I've worked in the White House and I've worked for, all these other things, is nonplussed by this, and he's not a political person. And so, but he loves the Weather Channel. So the Weather Channel was here that week.
I think in order to get your drugs when you're older, you have to check the box that you watched. Yeah. My dad was, before he died, was absolutely glued to it. I'm like, what the hell are are you watching? Look outside the window.
All about the Weather Channel. So the Weather Channel is broadcasting from Super Bowl week, and Diana sets me up with an interview before the Super Bowl. So I go on and tell my dad this is what time I'm going to be on, and he has never been prouder than the day I was on the Weather Channel interview. So I get a call Sunday night after the Super Bowl. They want me to come on like 7 the next morning to do like a wrap up on the Weather Channel. And I said, sure. So I get up early, I go back in, I do the thing, but I don't tell my dad because it's like midnight when I find out, and it's 7 in the morning. So I leave the interview and I'm walking back to my car to go to the office to, what am I going to do now? I don't know. It's over. And, and he said, and my phone rings. And it's my dad, and he's like, you did a great job on the Weather Channel again. And I was like, Dad, are you just literally watching it like it's a TV show all the time? I didn't realize this, So he was never been prouder. So that's how, that's what I did right after the Super Bowl was I made my dad proud by being on the Weather Channel.
We can put that on your tombstone.
I know.
I was on the Weather Channel.
Traffic and weather on the 8th. Yeah.
Did you do the zip line?
I did. I'm terrified of heights. And so we did the testing. And so I told Andy Arnold and then Jeremiah Shirk, who is my other guy, I said, one of you's in front of me and one's behind. And I'm going to get 3 flights up and say, I'm not doing this. You have to make me keep walking up these stairs. And sure enough, we get to the 2nd floor, and I think Andy was behind. And I turned around and said, get out of my way. I'm going back down. And he said, no, you told me not to do that. And I said, I'm not kidding. Get out of my way. And he's like, no, just turn around and do one more flight. So we did that 11 flights. And then I sat down on the platform and they hooked me up and the guys pushed me to the edge because it's everything in you not to stand at the top of an 11-story building and take a step off of it. Even if there's a harness on you, you should not, your instinct should tell you not to do that. So it took someone literally pushing me off of it, but it was awesome.
Did you do it again?
I did do it, ended up doing it one other time with my college roommate, Karen, at night. We had bought tickets. I went online and bought tickets early in the week, and so we did it maybe Thursday night.
What was the NFL's reaction to the Indianapolis Super Bowl? I mean, it's not only, I would say it's a seminal Super Bowl, it's also a watershed Super Bowl for the NFL. Yeah. How did they react to how everything, I mean, forget the weather, right? But just how everything was so different, the Legacy Project, the Super Bowl Village, all this stuff. What did they say to you?
I tell you 2 things that will tell you the answer to that. One is they do like an 8 a.m. Ops meeting every day for about 2 weeks, 10 days. And Allison and I would go to that meeting together and represent the city. If they had anything they needed at that point, they would tell us. And they did not understand what we were doing at the Super Bowl Village. It was sort of an annoyance to them as we planned
like a complication.
it. Yeah, you're complicating things, and we don't understand what you're doing, and we have the NFL experience for the fans, but like you can do it, but we don't understand why. Was sort of the thought. So they let us do it, but we were a bit of a gnat about it, I would say, and so. Well, of course, now it's in the bid specs and you have to do it. But regardless, we got to about so we opened on Friday before, and so the first weekend went amazingly. I think Roger Goodell did the zip line one day, kind of thing. And then Tuesday morning, Allison had something else, I think. I went to the meeting alone and I walked in at 8 and it's 50 people on this meeting, and they gave me a standing ovation when I walked in, and I sat down and I was like, I don't know, because usually we're the host committee screwed something up or the city isn't doing this right. And usually you're not getting positive feedback in these meetings. You're just trying to fix problems. And I thought, I don't understand what's happening right now. And they said, we finally get it. We understand what you were doing, and it's amazing. So that's one story. The other story is,
I have to ask you, you're tearing up.
Yeah, like it was really, because these are hard people I fought with sometimes for 2.5 years over things. And and they're great. And many of them became friends later. And then having worked all these Super Bowls, you'll talk to people. I was in Tampa in 21, I think I went and worked it. And they said, everybody will say, oh, how did you get here? Who did you know? Whatever. And they said, I'll always say, I worked on the Indianapolis host committee, and to a person, you could be in transportation, hotels, whatever. They say that's the best Super Bowl I've ever been to. And I'll be standing in Florida in 75-degree weather when they're saying this, best Super Bowl I've ever worked, I've ever been to. You guys did such a great job. I hope we go back. Like, everyone says that, and it's been a long time, You look at,
we have a few more minutes with Mel Raines, our Leaders and Legends podcast for this week. You look at organizations, and I'm a history guy. I love reading about leadership and how things get done. Indianapolis seems to punch above its weight in several categories. But to me, it's leadership above all else. You look at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway now. Mark Miles, Roger Penske, Doug Bowles, Allison Langdon, all working in the same place. Like, how could it not be a success?
Yeah,
and
I thought the race this year was fantastic.
I went, really, first time I had been in however long. It was beautiful.
Yeah, me too.
Everything about it. Pacers, Rick Fuson, Jim Morris, Herb Simon. Bill Benner's no longer there, but that's okay.
Steve Simon. Yeah, it's good people.
This lady named Mel Raines. All of you together. Lori Miser, who's just so wonderful, such a neat person. The list goes on and on. How much do you think about the art and science of leadership and how it makes a huge difference? We could also talk about the incomparable Pete Ward.
Yeah, Pete's
over at the Colts.
Best. Mm-hmm. I think about it a lot. I think about culture and how you create your culture, and how that having that right culture and leadership really cultivates successful host committees, businesses, events. I spend a lot of my time thinking about that. And some of it is hiring really talented people and giving them everything they need to do their jobs well. And then some of it is inspiring them. So, and I think people confuse management and leadership a lot. Management is not leadership.
Exactly.
And so when I look at just in our recent history, a lot of people would have said, the field house is perfect. You don't need to touch it. Don't do anything to Gamebridge Fieldhouse. And Rick and Herb and Steve and Jim had a vision that we need to evolve it, and it's got us to stay world class and keep getting all these events. We have to keep up with new generations, how they watch games and events, and it needs to be modernized. And the city saw that vision too. Mayor Hogsett and his team, and it used to be Barney Levingood, as you know, and now Andy Mallon. Everybody bought into that.
Speaking of great young leaders, Andy Mallon,
he's great. So we are almost done with this $360 million plus renovation and the new plaza that we're adding to be really community focused. And people might have said, and some people may still say, you didn't need to do anything to that. But we did. It's much better. That vision for that, we will get more events. We will, when we do host those events, they will be better events when they come, which I think leads to a thriving business community and people who want to live here. And I think all of these assets, the Colts and the stadium and the Pacers and the field house and the zoo and which I'm a proud member of the board of, but the zoo and the Children's Museum and the symphony and all these things are why we're not, Omaha.
Exactly.
And if we want to keep growing, we have to keep having the vision of how we keep advancing. I mean, it's hard to believe, but Lucas Oil Stadium is 15 years old. And it is in great shape. And I feel confident Andy and his team and Pete and the Ursays will make sure that it stays best in class. So the next time, whether it's the draft or the combine or another Super Bowl maybe one day or the college football playoff, that building will be the best one they've been in too. But you can't just rest on your laurels.
Because it's a copycat. I mean, to use a sports metaphor about the NFL, it's a copycat league.
Yeah.
So Nashville sees what we do.
Yeah.
We see what Chicago does, or, choose your city and go, well, we can do that. We should do that.
Yeah.
The plaza idea to me is terrific because it was just land sitting there. Parking garages they do have their utility.
Yeah.
But talk to us just a little bit before I ask you the 5 questions here at the end. What fans, what people are going to see when the wonderful Sheil Sexton, my former employer, gets done.
Shout out to Mike Diltz. Yeah.
Speaking of just unsung leaders,
Yep.
I remember seeing him drive a Prius around. I'm like, dude, what are you doing?
Now
You
he's
should
got
be-
his Scout. Now he's got his antique car that I'm jealous of.
I'm like, you should be driven around. I'll drive you around, Mike. I know you got, 5 daughters?
Yeah.
I'll be your adopted son.
Yeah.
What will citizens, visitors, people see? What will they be able to do that they couldn't have done a few years ago at the site where you're talking about the plaza?
Bicentennial Unity Plaza.
Right, by Gamebridge Fieldhouse.
For one thing, they'll be able to ice skate, which we have not had downtown in a long time. So we will be ice skating this winter for the first time in, I don't know when the rink left Monument Circle, but I know it's been a very long time.
And Pan Am had a rink or has one, but it's coming down.
Well, it's indoor.
Yeah, right. But it's going to be gone when they build the new hotel.
Yeah, it'll be gone. I think the big difference with this plaza, and because we have some great public spaces, certainly in town, is that a sports and entertainment company with a full-time talented team of people is programming that space that the Lilly Endowment so generously granted money to Andy and the CIB to help build. And so we've got some amazing public art. The goal is quite simply to make that one of the top 5 things when you come to Indianapolis. You haven't been here if you haven't been to Bicentennial Unity Plaza and see the Together sculpture and see the sphere, hear the story of the 200-year history of our city. And then you may also shoot some hoops. You may go skating. You may see a concert. You may do sunrise yoga in the morning. Our goal is to keep that active and open, and you may go and eat lunch on a bench one day too. But it's a community space. It's intended to primarily be for those kinds of events. And then the new Commission Row restaurant entertainment building that's going on there too is just another nice amenity in downtown for when there are conventions in town, or if we're having a big event in the field house, if you want to grab dinner or drinks before, it will be a great place to get married. There's a 250 seat event space on the top floor overlooking the plaza and downtown. And so, the investment that the Simon family has made and the CIB has made in that area of town, which I think is just vitally important to keep focusing on downtown and focusing on the assets there and growing that, it's just so important to our future as a city and a state.
Where would Indianapolis, we'll forget Indiana for a second, where would Indianapolis be without the Lilly Endowment?
I don't know. They're amazing people with such a great vision, clear vision of what they want to try to accomplish, and it moves the needle every day here.
I remember in 2000 when Indianapolis bid on the Republican National Convention. I
did not have a vote. I just want you to know I was just a staff person.
I just remember Mitch Daniels saying it's the latest in a series of stupid decisions by my party. He said something roughly like that.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
All right. So it's 20. The next convention's 24. It's already been decided. I forget where it is. Would you?
It's in Milwaukee.
That's right. That's
Anne
right.
Hathaway.
I was going to say Anne Hathaway would know for sure.
Yeah.
Would you advise in today's climate with everything that's going on for Indianapolis to host a Republican or Democratic convention? I mean, is it worth it?
I've got mixed views on it. I've worked on 6 of them, and I think Anne's going to do a great job in Milwaukee. Here's the difference. We're used to zip lines and parties and Georgia Street closes and everybody comes downtown and has a good time, and we're certainly going to do that with the NBA All-Star Game weekend, or that whole weekend of events. It's much more than just the game. And a political convention is not that. It's a special event assessment rating. No, it's a national special security event. It is barbed wire fencing. It is the National Guard standing outside the fence with guns. It is a different way to view your city. Now, your name of your city gets on, all over the world for 4 or 5 days of coverage, and that would be hard to buy. But I don't know that it showcases your city in the best possible light, the way we here are used to doing it and really rolling out the red carpet. It's really a security function, which doesn't always show things off very well. So I leave that to other people to decide if we should be doing that or not.
It is a bit of a mixed bag.
It is.
We have reached the point where we're going to stop asking questions of Mel Raines, because I legitimately have like 30 more. And so when you retire, you can come back on.
Okay, perfect.
I don't remember. Mel and Mark Miles and Greg Ballard came on the podcast to discuss the Super Bowl bid process. How did Indianapolis get it? It was a fun conversation, obviously. So I don't know if you did the 5 questions then, but you're going to do them now.
I don't think we did, actually. I think
we ran out of time
Super
because
Bowl.
Miles had to be in Broad Ripple or something. He was very kind to come on.
Yeah.
What was your first job?
My first job was working at Notre Dame at Corby Hall, where the priests and monks live, serving dinner after school.
I don't know that we'll ever get that answer again.
Very first job. Had it for 3 years. It was a great job. Father Hesburgh was a friend then. It's a very
Speaking
weird
of leadership.
thing. Yeah, exactly.
What was your first concert?
Bryan Adams at the Fort Wayne Coliseum with my soccer team in high school.
Your
We
high
all
school
went.
soccer team?
My high school soccer team went.
If you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
I was thinking about this one, and I know you have so many historians, and they give these amazing answers like Moby Dick, and and I will tell you, I read a book last year. It's been out for a few years called Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes, and it's a really easy. She's a great writer, but it really popped me out of my comfort zone. I think we all get a little used to like invitations to interesting things. You turn down a lot. And the point of the book was like, say yes to things that scare you a little bit more. And it did. It has made me change my behavior. And I've had some great experiences by thinking about things a little bit differently. So I really recommend it.
Are you counting this podcast interview as?
It sure is.
Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
This is so hard. I listened to Jake's interview,
Mr. Jake Oakman?
Mr. Jake Oakman, and I think he mentioned the Red Sox. I was lucky enough to go to the Red Sox World Series in 2004, but I was at an earlier game than the winning game. I was born a month before Woodstock, and I think it would be really cool to go back and go to the first day of Woodstock and then leave and like shower and not have to live there for 3 days or whatever they did. But I think it would be really cool to go back in time and see what that was like as I was a baby.
That's a great answer. That's not come up. Yes, whatever day Jimi Hendrix was playing.
Yeah.
I would want to be there.
Yeah.
Last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record just to chat, whom would you choose?
Okay. I also gave this a lot of thought. And I think the obvious answer is Ryan Reynolds. So he's
Does Blake get to come?
No, this is a one-on-one dinner. He's obviously a great businessman who's done very well. He owns a sports team. We would have a lot in common. I think we would be instant friends. And I'm pretty sure we should try to get that scheduled.
I'll take care of that.
Okay.
Through the Leaders and Legends podcast. But
Perfect.
then he has to come on.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect.
Deal?
Yeah. Deal.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Our guest today has been Mel Raines, President, Chief Operating Officer with Pacer Sports and Entertainment. When you want to talk about leadership in this city, you need to start with Mel Raines. I've never heard anyone ever say a bad word about you. They say nothing but praise, and it's deservedly so. Thank you for your kindness to me personally and for everything you've done for the city. It's remarkable.
Thanks for having me on, Robert. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.
This podcast was produced and edited by Chris Spangle and Leaders and Legends LLC. If you're interested in starting a podcast or taking yours to the next level, please contact us at leadersandlegends.net.